Today's webinar is on QforMe, and my name is Callan Chabella. I'm the CEO of Inference Solutions, and I do probably about half the webinars that we do. So if you've got any questions about Inference as we go through, please feel free to ask, and you'll see on the webinar menu, there's an ability to ask questions. So if you ask questions via that system, we'll be able to get to those questions at the end of the session, and I'll make sure I have time to go through all of those. Okay. You'll also notice that in the handout section, there are the slides for today's webinar. So if you're interested in taking these slides and showing them to someone else in your organization, please do. You can download them from there. And also after the session, I'll upload the webinar video link. So there's a recording of this webinar. You'll be able to share that as well. Okay, so what we're actually looking at today is Inference QforMe. For those that are familiar with Inference products, you're probably most familiar with Inference Studio, which is our service creation environment for complex IVR and sophisticated call handling and call routing. QforMe is a very different application. It's essentially virtual queuing, particularly designed for BroadSoft service providers. So those service providers running BroadWorks and wanting to add a virtual queuing capability to their BroadWorks platform. So what we're going to go through today is what is QforMe. We'll have a look at the actual QforMe application itself. We'll configure a new queue in QforMe, and I'll talk about what all these things mean. We'll make a booking in terms of have our place held in a queue, and we'll actually do a number of demonstrations as we go through the pack today. And finally, we'll finish with questions. All right, so essentially, QforMe at a high level is really quite simple. It allows you to hold your place in the queue, or have Inference hold your place in a queue. So this is a contact center queue. So you're waiting to talk to an agent, so that the callers don't have to wait. Okay, and really the reason people like to implement these sorts of systems is to really drive customer satisfaction. You've probably had that experience where you've rung into a call center, and either they haven't told you how long you're going to be waiting, or they've told you how long you're going to be waiting, but it's a very long time. So 30-minute wait time or that sort of thing. And as we come into the Christmas and holiday period, these sorts of frustrations get bigger because a lot of organisations out there are going to have bigger and bigger queues than they would typically have during other parts of the year. Okay, so the main drive for QforMe is to drive customer satisfaction and to really minimise that hold time. It's not so much a minimisation of hold time as a levelling of hold time. What you notice with something like QforMe is that as the queue length increases, the likelihood of someone saying, yes, hold my place, I don't want to wait, increases. And so what you see is a general leveling out of that queue wait time. And what you can do with QforMe is you can set the thresholds that you want it to kick in at. So you might want it to kick in at 5 minutes, for example, or 10 minutes, or whatever you need for your own business purpose. Really taking your call center to the next level, and this is part of what Inference does when working with BroadSoft carriers, is we provide all those features that people maybe coming from a premise-based environment, say they're migrating their telephony from a premise-based PBX, and they're moving to a cloud provider running a BroadWorks-based contact center, and they're looking for the same sorts of features that they had in that premise-based environment. And virtual queuing is a pretty commonplace feature these days. Okay. So the application itself, it actually sits directly alongside Studio. So what we're going to do in a minute is log into a typical customer account, and we'll actually see what the QforMe interface actually looks like. It's designed to integrate directly with Studio. It's pretty rare for somebody to use, say, QforMe without also using Studio, because Studio is typically how you would book a QforMe, so how you would book a callback. You would use a Studio script to do that booking. It is possible to do it without that, but I'll talk about that in a minute. You can use a simple booking template within Studio, so you can get up and running with QforMe very, very quickly, and we'll do that today. The other way of using QforMe is actually integrating it into your mobile application strategy. So what I mean by that is QforMe basically is driven by API, and typically those APIs are triggered by, say, a call flow in Studio, i.e. a booking script, for example, but it doesn't have to be driven that way. You can actually just trigger those APIs directly for example, through a direct integration from your website or through a mobile application on, say, your iPhone or your Android device. So you can actually just put yourself into the queue without actually having to ever ring the contact center. Rather, the contact center works in reverse and will ring you when you're at the front of that queue. One of the other interesting things about QforMe is how it's actually priced at the wholesale level. Now, obviously, Inference works only with service providers, and how service providers take the product to market is completely up to them. But the pricing model that we sell to carriers is what we call a waiter model. So this is essentially the number of calls you would like to have held in queue on behalf of your customers. We refer to each call being held by a waiter. They are literally waiting on your behalf or your customer's behalf, and you can buy these waiters in blocks of 5. So if you have lots of call centers and lots of queues, you might have hundreds of waiters, and every time a waiter is sitting in that queue, it's actually reserved. And when it gets to the front of the queue and the agent answers it, its job is done, and it connects you through to the caller that asks for the callback, and then it finishes its job and it can be reassigned. So you can basically keep cycling through those blocks of waiters that you have, and you just need to think about how many do I need at any one point in time, and that's the amount of capacity that you need to purchase. And just like Studio, it's basically done on a monthly basis. So you'd say if you bought 500 waiters, it would be 500 waiters. You'd have that for the entire month, and then you could vary that up and down as required in a true SaaS fashion. And the other reason, one of the rather nice things, I guess, about using QforMe is it works with the same reporting framework as Studio. So basically, you're going to probably use a Studio script to make those bookings, and so you can do the same reporting that you're typically used to in Studio and report to the same data stores and so forth. Now, if you're not familiar with Studio, we'll go through some of this in a bit more detail when we get to the demo part. But just looking at the list of participants on the webinar today, I can see that a lot of them are from service providers that already sell Studio on a regular basis. So these probably quite familiar with these ideas. Okay, so let's talk about how we actually configure QforMe itself. Okay, so QforMe revolves around this concept of a queue and a waiter. Okay, so a queue is literally a BroadWorks queue. So it's a call center queue. It could be a hunt group or something like that. But typically it's a call center queue. And you can create as many of them as you like within QforMe. So once you have a block of waiters, you can actually split those waiters up any way that you like and assign them to the various queues. Okay. We'll do this now. We'll create a new queue and we'll assign some waiters to it. The other thing you can do within QforMe is customize exactly what the agent will hear when they receive a call, which is actually a QforMe waiter, which is waiting on behalf of a customer, as opposed to the customer themselves. Okay, so you still receive a call just like you would as if the caller was in the queue, but instead it's an automated call, and you can customize what that experience sounds like for your agents within the contact center environment. And finally, we'll also talk about the different APIs that you can trigger either from within Studio or from a mobile application or a website, such as I talked about earlier. So let's do that now. Let's switch out to the Inference interface. So here I am. Here, I've actually logged in already. So I've actually can see the list of applications that my account has access to. So this is just a typical enterprise account, so something that your customers would have access to. In this case, I've got 3 applications that are enabled for this account: Password Reset, QforMe, and Studio. So if you attended the last webinar, which was on Studio as a technology aggregation hub, we obviously spent most of our time talking about Studio down here, but today we're going to be looking at the second link here, which is QforMe. Clicking on QforMe, it loads up the QforMe dashboard. Okay, so just like with Studio, there's a dashboard across the top of the screen. It tells me how many waiters have been assigned to my account. So this particular account has 5 waiters assigned to it, so it can wait on behalf of 5 callers at the same time. That's a very small number. In fact, that's the smallest number you could possibly buy, but for the purposes of today, it'll be fine. It'll also tell me how many waiters I have unassigned to queues. Okay, so you basically allocate waiters to any number of queues that you have. In this case, I've assigned all of my waiters. I don't have any waiters freed up. And finally, how many queues do I actually have? So in this case, I have 3 queues. And just like in Studio, you basically go up to the menu at the top and you see the similar interface that you see in Studio. And if I wanted to add a new queue, I could just click on the plus button next to the queue, and I could call it Callan's queue. And I could give it a phone number for the queue. So this is the actual number on BroadWorks that the queue is resident on. So this is where all the callers would normally be going, but in this case, the waiters are going to be sent to this queue to wait on behalf of those callers. Okay. And you can see that in this case, there's a slider, and I can actually slide up to the maximum number of unassigned waiters that I have free. Now, at the moment, I have none free, so I can't assign any. So I can still add the queue, and it'll still appear in my list. And if I go back to here and click on queues, you'll see the queues appearing. So there it is there, Callan's queue. And there are 3 other queues here that I've got as well. Okay. Now, if we actually look further across, you can see the call center number assigned to each of those queues, and then this number of assigned waiters. So you can see here that in sample CC queue, I've got 2 waiters assigned. In my second queue, I've got 3 waiters assigned, and that's essentially used up all the waiters that I have, and so I have none left to use in any of the other queues. Okay. If I wanted to modify this, for example, I wanted to edit this queue here, I could just click on Edit, and I could just reduce the number of assigned waiters, and now I've got 1 waiter that's free, and I could add that to that queue that I just created then. So edit that and assign that waiter back. There we go. So now that new queue that I've got has 1 waiter assigned to it. Now again, dealing down in these very small numbers is a little bit unrealistic. You'd probably be dealing in dozens of waiters or even hundreds of waiters, depending on how large the contact center environment is. But it gives you an idea of how it works. Now, next to the actual listing of the queues, you see the waiter status. Okay. Now, currently they are all blue bars, which basically means they're all available. So they're just sitting there, they're waiting to be used by callers, and we'll see these turn to black as they currently are used. Okay, so we'll see that filling up. So this is a good place to go and look to see how your QforMe system is performing. Okay. Now, we mentioned about customizing what the call center agent will hear when a waiter arrives at that call center agent, and we do that by going to the prompt menu here. And the QforMe waiters are really quite simple. It says, welcome to the QforMe service, and do you want to take this call? So essentially, as an agent, all I hear is whatever we specify here under the prompts. So when a call is received from queue, I'll hear whatever the welcome prompt is. So I could say, for example, this is an automatically generated callback. Do you want to take this call? And then press 1 to take the call, press 2 to return it to queue. And again, we can obviously modify this. Now, version 1 of the platform is really quite simple. There's a version 2 coming out in second quarter next year, which will actually allow you to do more designing of the QforMe waiter. And this has been in response to customers having very specific requirements. For example, the ability for a caller to leave a message and then have that message played back to the agent prior to the agent deciding whether they want to accept the call or not. Now, very specific contact center environments will allow agents to send calls back to queue, for example, if the agent cannot help that particular caller. But for the vast majority of deployments out there, this sort of interface with a very simple waiter is all you really need to go to get started. Okay, but if we wanted to change the prompts here, we could upload audio against the prompts and put any audio in there that we like. Very similar to the Studio interface if you're familiar with Studio. Now I'll come and show some of these other menus later on when we actually come design our booking script and we actually book a waiter. For now, I'll return back to the PowerPoint pack. All right. So the booking script is really where I guess the complexity comes into within QforMe, because it is done in Studio, you can actually design any type of booking script that you like. Okay. Now we make it very simple, and this works for most people, just to use a Studio template. So you'll see that there's a QforMe booking template, and one of the nice things about using that template is you can use it to hook directly into, say, BroadWorks XSI if you've enabled Broadworks XSI, which is the Extended Services Interface, you can actually have the Studio script that's doing the booking query the status of that queue and actually determine how long the wait time is, and so you can quote that to the caller. This is a really useful feature. So when the caller rings in, you can actually say, okay, the wait time is 5 minutes, the wait time is 10 minutes, and so on. And because it's done in Studio, you can also make that conditional. So if you wanted to, you could say, well, if the wait time is less than 5 minutes, let's not even offer QforMe at all. Let's not offer callbacks at all. And so you can completely configure it as you would any other Studio script. Okay, so obviously you can customize prompts and you can personalize it and do anything else that you would expect to be able to do in Studio. So I'm going to go back to the interface now, and I'm just going to go and show you how that that booking script works. So I'm going to return back to Portal, and I'm going to click on the Studio link within the same account, and this is going to load up the Studio interface and all of my scripts. Okay, so just before the webinar started, I actually created a new script, and I called it QforMe Tester, and all it is a direct copy from the QforMe booking template. Now, just to show you how easy it would be to create one right on the fly, we'll call this one, live script, and we'll add that. So adding a new script, and then clicking on live script. And just want to show you that there is a QforMe template here. So I'm just going to search for QforMe. There it is, QforMe booking, right there, and click on continue. So you can get up and running with the booking script in just a few seconds. Okay, so there it is, a complete QforMe booking script deployed on Studio, in just a few seconds. Now, one of the important things about using a QforMe booking script is that you need to link it to your QforMe waiters. And the way that that is done is using the QforMe APIs. Okay, so I'm going to show you just quickly how that works. So if we look at this script at the start, we come in, and the first thing it does is it just checks to see if there are any waiters available for using. Now, we were talking before about having a certain number of waiters free. Once all your waiters are assigned, basically this check waiter script would determine there are no further waiters because you're unlicensed, and it would basically exit out of the QforMe script and return back to wherever the IVR would have gone, which would normally be just return the caller back to the queue. So if there are no waiters available, it's going to go down this right-hand path. If there is a waiter available, it's going to ask them whether they would like a callback. Okay, and if they want a callback, it's going to check that we have their ANI displayed. So you can see here, yes, they would like a callback, and then let's check for their ANI. Now, obviously, we need a phone number on which we need to ring them back on, and so if the ANI is displayed, we'll confirm that ANI to them. So we have your number as this, and confirm it to them, and if they say, yes, that's my number, then that's the phone number we'll call them back on. If they have no ANI, because they've got a barred number, for example, we'll actually have to ask them to key in their phone number so that we know where to return the call. And basically what we do is once we have that phone number and we have it confirmed, we then add them to the queue. Okay, so what this add to queue button here, or this node is doing here on the screen, is it's actually triggering the QforMe APIs to basically place a call into the queue on their behalf and consume one of those waiters that we assigned to that queue earlier. Okay. Now, the APIs are really quite straightforward. I will just show you how that works. So I'm just going to go back to QforMe quickly, back to Portal, click on QforMe. And if we look at any of these queues that we've created, so if I look, for example, at that Callan's queue and I go Action, you'll see here in the Action menu, there are actually two APIs that are available. One is called the Check Waiter, and the second one is Add to Queue. So it corresponds exactly to that script that we just looked at. So the first one is to see, does this queue have any waiters available? This is the API that we'd use here. So it's simply a cut and paste. You just copy this URL, paste it into your booking script, and you're ready to go. And then secondly, for the second one, where we actually add a call to the queue, is another API. Okay, and we copy that into the second booking script. Now, the reason why we expose these APIs is, as I was saying earlier, you may not want to use a booking script to trigger these waiters. You may want to use a click to call button on, say, a mobile application or you may want to have a button in the support section of your website that your customers can use, and then they go, look, yes, call me because I'm having trouble. You can actually use this type of facility and these APIs and just directly integrate them into your applications. Okay. So, going back to Studio again, I'm going to look now at the QforMe script, booking script that I created just before we started the webinar. Okay, so I'm going to go to the script view, and the one that I created was called QforMe Tester, and I will go and look at that. And just to show you how all I've done is copy and paste those APIs in, if we'll go down to this integration node here, where we actually are checking the waiter, and I click on that, you can see that we're actually just basically referring to a variable here, which is called the check waiter URL. And that variable has been set by me in the script variable tab. So there it is there. So there's my URL for adding to the queue. It's just right there on the screen. I just cut and paste. And for checking the waiter, I cut and paste the second one as well. That was all I needed to do to get this system live on the network. Okay. So I have already assigned a phone number to this particular QforMe booking script. So I'm actually going to ring this. And keep in mind this has all been provisioned in just a few minutes. So we haven't gone and customized any of the audio or anything like that, but we could do that because it's obviously all done in Studio. So I'm just going to put it on speaker so you can have a listen.
Welcome to the callback booking service.
Sorry, I think I've just gone off hung up on the call. Sorry, 1 second. Let's try that again.
Welcome to the callback booking service. The expected wait time is 5 minutes. If you would like to book a callback from an agent, please press 1. To return to the queue, press 2. Your phone number is 415-535-2229. If this number is correct, press 1. To enter a different phone, your callback has been booked. You will receive a call from an agent when you are at the front of the queue. Thank you for using this service. Have a great day. Goodbye.
So that's just a standard call flow. It takes about 30 seconds to get through that. You can obviously just barge ahead by pressing 1 and saying confirming that number. Of course, you can customize this to be whatever you like because it is done in Studio. But it gives you an idea of a typical waiter experience or booking a waiter experience. And again, if we wanted to do conditional bookings, for example, we wanted to only offer QforMe once the wait time exceeded a particular threshold, we could obviously do that. And we could just drop in, just here where it says play wait time, we could actually put in a decision node here and say, okay, check XSI, what's the wait time of the queue? Okay, it's 2 minutes. Don't even bother to offer them a callback. Just go straight down this branch over here and return them to the queue. Okay. Now, if we go back to QforMe now, okay, so I'm going to go back to QforMe. We can see that my waiter there is sitting in the queue. Okay, so this bar has gone to this sort of dark blue color, and that means that the waiter is currently in use. So one of these waiters is currently in use. Now it's going to sit there for as long as it takes for the next agent to answer that call. And when the agent does answer that call, they're going to hear a very simple prompt, which is going to be defined by what we set in the waiter prompts. And it's going to say press 1 to initiate the callback, and then it's going to give me a ring back on my cell phone here. Now, if we wanted to go in and have a look at this in detail, we can actually go and look at the waiters through the waiter menu, and you can see there are the current waiters that are waiting. So the queue, the phone number that we're going to ring them back on, the universal identifier for the call, when it was created, and we can actually go in there, and if we wanted to, we could manually delete that waiter and allocate it. Now in this particular case, there are no agents assigned to this queue, so this callback's going to be sitting there for a very long time. So I'm just going to go through and delete it. Okay. And now that waiter has been freed up. Okay, so now if I go back to my queues, you'll see that that waiter has been freed up. You can actually go and see the answered calls as well. So you can actually look at the history of any waiter that has ever run, and you can actually go, and in this case, it's a new account, so no waiters have actually gone through to the call center. But you can actually see a list of all the waiters that would appear in this particular view when they were rung back and so on. So if you wanted to go and audit what happened, you could go and do so. Okay. Now, for service providers that are looking to demonstrate this to their own customers, we've actually got a demonstration portal available as well. So what the demonstration portal does is it basically allows a service provider to mock up within a web browser what it would kind of look like within a call center environment from both the calling party and the agent's perspective. Okay, so for those that are familiar with the BroadWorks Thin client, you'll be able to basically demonstrate that directly to customers. Okay, so it's a very interactive demonstration, and it's a little hard to do it just on the webinar today because we actually need 2 people. But just to give you an idea, I'll just switch out and just show you exactly what it looks like, so you get an idea for what it would be like if you were demonstrating it to your customers. All right, so this is the demo portal, and you see here we've got demonstrations of post-call survey, voice biometrics, and also, of course, QforMe. I'm going to set myself up as a demonstrator there and click on QforMe. Okay, and what you see here on the left-hand side of the screen is you're actually seeing sort of a description of what is happening. So you can see here what is QforMe. Your customers don't like waiting on hold, but nobody wants to lose their place in the queue either. And there's a button here to actually start the demo. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you actually got an embedded view of the typical BroadWorks Thin client. Now, in your case, it might be branded in your own service provider look and feel, but essentially it's the same kind of view. If you're selling the BroadWorks Thin client, this is the idea. And calls, as they arrive, basically come in at this part of the screen here. So you can see that this agent here is currently on a call. That call's been going for 10 minutes. And so on, and it shows you that there's a certain number of queued calls and so on. Okay, so if we actually click on start the demo, it's basically works your way through this interaction. So what my phone is doing is it's ringing now, and we'll hear the demo.
There is currently an expected wait time of 5 minutes. We can hold your place in the queue and call you once an agent is available. Would you like us to call you back?
Yes.
Thank you. You will receive a call back from the next available agent.
So that's just a variation on callback there. So there was only about a 10-second interaction required with the IVR there. And you'll see what's happened on the right-hand side of the screen is that virtual waiter is now sitting in the queue. So once this agent has finished with this current call, the next call they're going to get is a virtual waiter, and that waiter is the actual QforMe product that has placed a call into that queue and is sitting there on behalf of the customer. Okay. So if I end this call, what I would hear through my headset is I would actually hear what the agent would hear, which is this customer has requested a callback. Press 1 to initiate the call, and then I would just press 1, and it would simply ring that caller back. Now, for the purposes of today, we're not going to be able to hear that because it's actually going to be coming through my headset, but just to show you what will happen there, answer, and now it's basically in the process of ringing me back, and there it is, ringing me back. Okay? So really simple, really simple. So this is a kind of demonstration that you can do with customers. It's very easy to set up. You just basically need access to the portal, and you can get basically going straight away. You don't need to log into Studio. You don't need to create queues. It's all basically just simulated for you in the browser environment. Okay, and we make this available because it's a very easy way for service providers to communicate with their customers.